Welcome, everybody, to our very first Turborepo webinar. My name is Jared Palmer. I'm joined here with Matt from Stately AI, and we're going to be doing some awesome demos for y'all and diving deep on Turborepo. So with that, let's get to it. My name is Jared Palmer. I'm the founder of Turborepo, which was acquired by Vercel back in September. At Jared Palmer on Twitter everywhere. I lead the Turborepo open source project at Vercel and a growing list of awesome individuals focusing on monorepos at Vercel. So we're just going to dive right in and get started. So what we're going to do today is talk about the best way to scale a code base. And it's not an obvious question, but it's something that has been thinking about for a while. And what we're going to do today is we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive on Turborepo and some of the ideas behind monorepos and what they are and what they aren't. And then we're going to jump in and actually migrate a code base, an existing code base, to Turbo and deploy it to Vercel and demonstrate some of the features of Turbo. So back to that, let's just jump in. So what is the best way to scale a code base? So as you write more code and your team gets bigger, product evolves, you have some options. You can split things up into many little Git repositories, each with a specific purpose like API or admin, or maybe my doc site or design system or Android app, etc. Or you can do what's becoming increasingly popular, which is to actually keep everything in one GitHub repo, one monolithic repository, a monorepo, if you will. And there are a lot of teams that have adopted this strategy or a modified version of it. The biggest monorepos on the planet are, or ever, I should say, are Google's and Facebook's or Meta's. And these code bases have billions of lines of code in them and sophisticated systems to ensure that developers stay productive. Because as you scale a code base, you're faced with some interesting challenges that I'm sure you all know about that are not so obvious. And the big cost there is when you maintain these code bases, you didn't really get into business necessarily to build, let's say, a build system. You probably got in business to build the product or thing you're building. And so it can be incredibly burdensome to have to maintain the additional complexity of keeping everything in one place. Oftentimes in a sort of polyrepo situation, a lot of the other services you'll work with, like passes or CI systems, are kind of built for them. And that really is because a lot of CI systems, particularly and general tools, really were built around like sort of the traditional Rails model of Heroku. But that just hasn't really evolved. So monorepos introduce a bunch of extra complexity that we're going to get into right now. So when you have a monorepo, when you've got multiple services, packages, applications in one code base, you just have an explosion in complexity. You have to deal with testing and deployment, like working with your CI system, setting up, and we'll just focus on the front end here, setting up Jest, setting up or whatever test framework you're using. You ideally need to figure out a way to break the relationship of rebuilding everything versus rebuilding only the thing that's changed. So you need to be able to incrementally, ideally execute. You need to figure out a way to ideally cache things you've previously done before. And again, you don't have to do these things, but they're going to become problematic as your code base scales. All of a sudden, you're going to see, as your team grows, your builds will start going to, 10 minutes, then it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes. It just becomes a massive problem unless you solve these issues. If your company or project is using a single monorepo for everything, then you may or may not run into this. But if you're in a monorepo that is, let's say, one of many, or like a library or something like that, you will also have to deal with versioning and publishing. Some monorepos don't have any versioning at all. And if you can avoid it, that's actually our recommendation. But publishing and versioning is another thing you'll have to deal with. And last but not least, dealing with your IDE, like getting VS Code to work is just hard. It's not always obvious when you go into use some of these tools, how all configuring your extensions will work. And it just, again, it's kind of a mess. So what I wanted to do with Turborepo was come up with a way to take advantage of the techniques and tools that were pioneered by Google and Meta to build some of the largest code bases on earth and bring it to sort of the masses. And, the problem with the systems that they use, specifically Google's is called Bazel or Blaze internally, and Facebook's is called Buck, is that these tools are mostly designed for Java and C++ and Golang native languages. And really, they don't jive that well with JavaScript. It's not saying that you can't use them with JavaScript. There's a Bazel plugin for Node.js. It just doesn't work as well. On top of that, the teams that, although Bazel is an open source project, the way that Blaze works internally at Google is vastly different than the way you'd probably use it on your own. And there's a team of 100 people focusing just on this problem. So the idea with Turbo is, what if we could take a lot of these awesome ideas that, again, were pioneered by the FANG companies and bring them to the masses in a way where it was as close to zero configuration as possible, where you could get as much bang for your buck, so to speak, with as little maintenance burden. So the way that Turborepo does that is that it helps orchestrate your tasks that you need to run in your monorepo. It helps with incremental execution, so you never need to recompute tasks that's already been completed. And it also does what's called distributed remote caching, which it means that when you run something in your monorepo and you configure it properly, the file system artifacts that are emitted by that task and the logs can actually be shared in almost like a Dropbox for your team. And so if somebody on your team or CI/CD has executed some task like next build or Vite build or like React scripts build or whatever it is you're using, doesn't matter. It can be shared and recycled. And when it's recycled, the second time you run it, it'll be instantaneous. And so collectively, these three features allow Turbo to reduce your build times by up to, I guess 90% is about the mathematical limit, it seems, but somewhere between, I'll say 30 and 85 is very doable. And that's what we're going to talk about and show off today. We're going to show how Turborepo is incrementally adoptable. We're going to show how you can use it to orchestrate tasks and workflows. And we're going to show off how to set up Turborepo with a few tools that you're probably already using. So with that, I want to toss it over to Matt, who's going to introduce himself.
Sounds good. That was awesome, Jared. My name is Matt. I'm from Stately. I'm a developer advocate at Stately. And we've been using Turborepo since January, since it got open sourced, because it is totally open source now. You can have a look at the source. Everything is developed in public, and it's now part of Vercel. So why don't I start sharing my screen, Jared? And what I'll do is I'll show you kind of the setup that we have at Stately. So if I share my screen, you should be able to see what I see imminently. So by the way, what we do at Stately, just to give you a bit of context, is we do a lot of work with state machines. We think state machines are the way that you should be structuring your application. And this gives you the ability to actually draw out state machines on this visual builder and actually execute them as code. So you can kind of like simulate them, do all this fun stuff, share this with non-technical people. And basically the app that we're looking at today is the code that drives this thing we're looking at right now, our visual editor. And this is kind of what our monorepo looks like. We have a kind of apps directory here where we have docs and web. These are our docs, which is a Next.js app. And then we have web, which is our sort of website, and it's a Next.js app. And we also have a set of packages as well. And this is a pretty common setup with kind of monorepos, right, Jared? This sort of apps packages setup.
Yeah, that's the convention. You can put them anywhere you want, but that's the one we like.
Yeah. And we're using Yarn workspaces for this. And with Yarn workspaces, what you do is inside your root package.json, you have these apps and packages here. And then each one inside here, so everything inside apps, has its own package.json where it declares more dependencies and dev dependencies and all this sort of thing. And these could technically be like packaged off and sent up to NPM if we wanted to. And that's the setup. So what we do then is this repo is without Turborepo. So we don't have anything here. And we've got some things that we need to run in order to make sure that our app is working and that our monorepo is functioning. So to do that, we run a CI, and we actually run that on GitHub Actions. And if you want to check this out, you can go to wherever the link is, Matt Pocock Turborepo Stately demo. I'm hoping that Amy's going to throw it in the chat right now so you guys can check this out. And we're going to push up to this repo, and you'll be able to see the CI checks running along with us. So the GitHub action, what it does currently is it runs yarn install, then yarn lint, and yarn test. So it lints the repo, we're using TypeScript here, and it also tests the repo. So we've got some test scripts here. So to get a baseline, why don't we run yarn lint, since that's what's supposed to happen. I've already run yarn install. And it looks like we're running a command called yarn workspaces run lint. And let's investigate that, because lint is going to be a script that's declared in our root package.json. So Jared, this takes 8.14 seconds. That's interesting. What is this command doing?
So it's going to go through each and every package in the monorepo, npm package in the monorepo. It's going to look at the package.json file in that package, and it's going to run the scripts lint command, which may differ between each package, but it's going to run that in what is called topological order. And what that means is a fancy term for dependencies go first. So if you have a situation where a package depends on another package, the yarn workspaces run command will make sure that you run the commands and the dependencies before the things that depend on them. And that ensures that if you're doing something like a build or there is some sort of output, that it's all there by the time you proceed through the dependency graph.
Gotcha. And where are these dependencies declared?
Also in package.json, in dependencies and dev dependencies. And these are the name of the package on npm or locally in the repository, and a version or semver specifier, which is the right side of the object.
Got you. So here, my UI package depends on stately config, where I have some like ESLint configs, for example. So config, wherever it is, package.json here. And it also depends on the TS config as well, which I've got shared across repos, which is actually a really cool tip. Okay, and then my website, for instance, it actually depends on the UI bit only. And we can see that in pages where I'm able to just kind of import from stately UI, and I get this button. And this button, if I can command click to it, it's just this little button that says boop on it. So we've got sort of eight.
We have, in our monorepo, we've got two Next.js apps, which we set up, a docs app and a web app. And
that's right.
These aren't like full functioning applications. They're just sort of shell packages. What we're going to focus on today is less about the code itself, but how we're orchestrating and building everything in the monorepo.
Totally. The package.jsons are pretty much how we have them in production. Actually, we don't have that much more than this stuff. Okay. So how can we this 8.14 seconds just for linting our entire repo? That seems not very turbo. How do we turboify this?
Sure. So let's install Turbo from npm, and let's install it to the root of the workspace. So we have the -w there and the Turbo package.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
That's
and
good.
Now let's add a file called turbo.json. And this is where you configure Turbo. And it's not zero config, but it's pretty close. So let's get going. So in Turbo, we need to define what is called a pipeline. And the pipeline is a declaration of the relationship between your package.json scripts, which we just ran, and their cache outputs. And with these two things, Turbo can do some incredible things. So let's get started. So which one do we want to start with? Lint?
Let's go with lint.
Okay, we'll start with lint. And again, you can incrementally adopt Turbo one command at a time. So we're going to start with lint. So in our pipeline, we're going to define a lint key. And in that key, we're going to define two other keys. One is going to be called depends on. And that's going to be empty, an empty array. And the other one is also going to be called outputs, and it's going to be an empty array. And what these two keys do is they tell Turbo, tells Turbo which other package.json scripts by convention the lint command in each package depends on. And the outputs key tells Turborepo that our lint commands don't actually emit any files. They just emit logs, and logs are implicit and automatically recorded. And this will come back later when you see how Turbo works. But I think that's enough to get us started.
Cool. What is that, like 7 lines of code or something? That's pretty cool. So now what do I run instead of my yarn lint command?
So we can either create a package.json script to do this for us, or we can make a script called Turbo, and then you'll run stuff with yarn Turbo. Or we can just change this over to be just Turbo run lint.
Okay. So Turbo is taking over kind of, instead of yarn workspaces, it's going to be Turbo that's running our script.
Yeah.
And so I should just be able to run yarn lint. And what's going to happen that's different?
Well, nothing the first time, but except for the fact that all of the lint tasks will be run in parallel, because we've told Turbo that our lint tasks don't really depend on each other. And Turbo will interpret this information and say, okay, well, let's run it at maximum concurrency. And Turbo is thus also an orchestrator, not just a build system in that, if that makes sense. So
let me get this right. So when I ran yarn workspaces run lint, what it was doing is it goes through that dependency graph, as you say. So it's doing like the docs first, blah, 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 blah. And it's running them all one after another. So that's why it's kind of slow, even though each one actually takes only like less than a second. So if I now run yarn lint, which is running our yarn turbo run lint, oh, geez, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so that was instant. I guess you must have had it locally before.
I think I cheated there a little bit because
it's okay. You got the sauce. You could run it with you could pass the force flag.
I should have cleaned my local first. Yeah. So okay, this is more realistic. So this is what's happening here. We got a little.
Yeah.
So it's now down to 3.2 seconds, even though it did actually run everything just from being in parallel instead of one after the other.
Cool.
Okay.
Also, one thing we should do, Matt, is we should delete the .turbo directory, because we're going to get to that later in the root, just so that we don't.
You are absolutely correct.
All right. Cool.
So now what happens? You're saying that there's some stuff here about it being none of this has been cached, but 8 of these will run. What does this line mean here?
So it means that Turbo is going to look at it. So Turbo uses that outputs key to attempt to cache any file system outputs that are emitted. You can control this. You can pass in some globs, and we'll do that later with a build task. But it uses information and it records the logs as you run each command or every package.json script. And you can see actually, we force executed here. It's a cache bypass, but normally we would expect it actually to be a cache miss. And you can just delete that cache and run it again, and you'll see this. We'll see the cache miss again. So Turbo, unlike something like make, which you may be familiar with. So the way that make works is that make actually looks at the file modification time. And if the file modification time hasn't changed in a make file, it won't rerun the task. Turbo works slightly differently than make. Turbo actually does what is called, Turbo actually hashes and looks at the contents of your files. It doesn't do anything with those, the contents of it. It just hashes them. And it creates a fingerprint, almost a snapshot, if you will, for each package.json script in your pipeline. And those fingerprints are unique and stable and content addressable. And then it records all the outputs and the logs, and it dumps them into its content addressable cache, which you're seeing on the right-hand side. And if you pop open one of those, you'll see the logs for each one respectively. So A52, we could just look for A52 on the right.
So just so I get this right. So if what's going on is that it's going into like this config package here, it's looking at the actual contents of that config package. So like stately config, for instance. And then where is it? Package.json. It's looking at that entire directory. And it's making a hash of that. And that hash is what we're seeing there. So if I change something, that hash is going to change, right?
Yeah. It's actually even a bit more sophisticated than that.
Ooh.
So it looks at not just the contents of the directory, but also it goes into the package.json of that directory, and it looks at its like external dependencies. It then looks into the root lock file If you go into yarn.lock for a second, you pop that open, and it looks at the from package.json. It takes like a specification. So if you search for, I don't know, let's search for next. So if you go Apple F and search for next at, okay. So we've got next M. Let's do next, just at, actually put the at afterwards, and then we can do, okay. It doesn't matter. But basically what it will look at is the specified dependency or dev dependency in package.json. It then looks at the root lock file and resolves that dependency and then the version that's actually installed. So you may have a mismatch. You may have like, oh, I need just next greater than 12, but the actual installed version is 12.08. So this is important information.
That's so smart.
Takes that information and then it includes almost like a Merkle tree. It will include the hashes of its own hashes, and it includes that together and it gets a final hash.
Magic.
And that works really well.
So this then, what we're saying is that we've saved this like A52 thing inside no modules, cache turbo. And if I look inside here and I look at one like, for instance, config lint, let's take a look. So config lint was 52. There it is. And there is the logs that were output. Interesting.
Yep.
Now, what's going to happen when I run this command again?
So Turbo is going to run the same analysis again. And then it's going to get to that same fingerprint, that same hash. And then it's going to quickly look at its cache. And it's going to see if there's anything in there. If it had like file system outputs, like it was a next build task, in this case, it just has these log files, it would move those into position. But for now, and then replay the logs instantaneously. And this happens in just a matter of milliseconds, which you'll see.
Okay, so it's 3 seconds now. It was 7 seconds. Where's it going to go to? What's your bet?
100 milliseconds, probably.
Below 100 milliseconds. Big claim.
Oh,
44 milliseconds. That's even quicker than when we did it in practice. That's crazy. Yeah. Okay, and so now instead of 0 cached, it's 8 cached. So it's looked at all of the hashes and it's gone, okay, this one's in my cache, this one's in my cache, this one, and everything's cached, and so it's just full turbo. Blimey. Okay, so what you're saying is because these hashes change based on the content, I can go into like docs, for instance, and docs pages index.tsx, and I can say, I can change the content, my lovely docs. And now when I rerun this, in theory, it's going to cache all of the stuff that docs is like one of the leaf nodes. So like it doesn't, nothing depends on docs. So it's only going to rerun the linting on docs.
Yep.
Let's give that a go. There we go. 7 cached, 8 total. Crazy.
So it didn't seem like much, but we went from 3 seconds to 2 seconds. So we just cut that. We just reduced our time. Well, at first we were at 8, right? And then we went to 3 because we have scheduling. And then through caching, again, the other part of Turbo, we were able to reduce it even further. So right now we're at what, 75% improvement? Not bad.
Yep, not bad. And of course, what we're missing here is like, we've now reduced the minimum amount of time that it takes to 44 milliseconds. So before, the minimum amount of time it takes would be 8 seconds, but now it's 44 milliseconds. Completely nuts. Okay, and what you're saying then is, because of all this stuff with the graph, is there a way that we can like look at the graph and sort of see what's happening? Or maybe we should do that later. But
let's do it later after we have more stuff in there.
That sounds good. And so if something like depends on something else, what you're saying is, because we've got some kind of quite low-level packages here, like the utils, for instance, utils.ts, or is it UI actually that depends on a couple of things? Yeah, we've got our button here. So instead of boop, we could change this to noop or something. And because it goes up the dependency graph, what you're saying is that everything that depends on this button will also be relinted.
Right. If we specify the relationship of the tasks to be that way. So if we don't, then Turbo will assume that these tasks are independent and then thus we run at some sort of level of maximum concurrency. So let's set up either test and build, and then we'll revisit, and then this will become even cooler because you'll see a change in UI have an impact on docs, and then a change in docs. We already saw the situation where it's going to only do that part. But at the moment, because everything is separate, because they're going to be run independently, we don't necessarily need to have the chain of dependencies.
Well, what I mean is here, because docs and web both rely on the UI, then only 3 tasks will be rerun. Right?
Oh, yeah, sure. That's true too. Exactly.
Okay. So if I run yarn lint, then it's running 7 cached. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Maybe we don't.
Right. Because I think what's happening basically, we haven't defined the relationship in turbo.json to specify this as a topological relationship.
Cool. So yeah, because we've got our lint command running, and let's actually now, I'm going to delete some of the changes I made inside the apps here, and I'm going to push this up. So let's say we've got added turbo to lint command. And what we should see is, where is that? And save change, remove everything. Yeah, added turbo to lint. All we've really done is we've just added this little pipeline, got some extra changes in our yarn lock, and we've added turbo. Okay. So what should happen now is in our CI, we should see the changes as we go, and we'll check in with the GitHub action in a second. We've done lint. We can probably do the same thing with test, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll just try and bash this out. We've got test, and this will be the same, right? Because, well, what if I wanted to lint my package first and then test it?
So you could then say that all test package.json scripts depend on that same package's lint script being run first. And so you could put the word lint in depends on.
Okay.
So lint. Yep. And you might also want to build your dependencies before testing. So the way you could do that is by putting an uppercase or just an up caret and then the word build. And then we'll define a build task if it has one. So build. And this one's gonna the way I would say to do build is let's also set build to depends on the same thing, up caret build. And I'll explain what this is what this means. And then let's set our outputs here to be, let's deal with the apps first. So for our outputs here, it will be we have 2 Next.js apps, those will be .next / ***. So that's a glob pattern. And then I don't think we're doing are we using tsup to transpile some stuff? I think we are.
Nope, no tsup, I don't think.
So a question in chat is a build task different from a build pipeline? I guess these words we're being a little loosey-goosey about our words here. No, they're the same sort of thing. So we sometimes call a package.json script internally as a task. And in a pipeline, a task is also like one of these keys. But they are related to the scripts in package.json. So in addition to, so the next question was, shouldn't test here depend on build instead of the up build? And that's a good question. So it depends on when you want to run your tests. Do you want to run your tests against source code, in which case you just really care about the dependencies being built? If you want to run your tests against the built version of a package or application, well, then, yeah, you'd actually want to remove that little up caret from the test script and wait till it's that package's own build and lint tasks were completed. So again, it just depends on what you're doing with your code base.
So for the newbies, should we just talk through what we've added here?
Yeah. I just want to finish with build. We want to add a dist folder, I think, as well. So let's do dist ***.
Sure. So let's say dist ***.
Yeah.
So, okay. So there's quite a lot of abstract stuff going on here, which is this test idea here. What's going on here is when you run test, it will then build all the dependencies. Let's ignore build for a second, because build isn't actually in our CI at the moment. So if we go ci.yaml, we've got only yarn lint and yarn test. And what we're saying is when we run test, we also want to make sure that we have run lint as well. So let's test that out first, and let's see what that does. Is the idea with Turbo that you can do something like, we've got lint and we've got test here. Is the idea that I would run yarn turbo run lint and yarn turbo run test?
No, you can actually run multiple commands at the same time. So actually, let's do yarn turbo run lint test.
So just like this.
Yep.
Okay. So now, what's going on? Wow.
Yeah. So we're running both linting and testing at maximum parallelism, reducing as much idle CPU time as possible by scheduling execution. So by taking the dependency graph and the pipeline, Turbo can collapse all of these waterfalls that would otherwise exist if you just ran them all in dependency first order.
Wow. This is crazy. In fact, there's some Cypress stuff, which we'll get to in a second, but like, this is wild. So it's running all of the lints first. And by the way, it missed on the cache. Why did it miss on the cache? Because we'd already run these lint commands before, right?
Yeah. So we made a change recently to Turbo's hash to ensure that whenever you change turbo.json, it wipes or it generates a new hash.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense because we changed some root config and you don't want to mess that up. Sure. So it's running all those lints and then afterwards it runs all those tests. This is getting a little bit hairy. Is there any way that we can visualize this?
Yeah. So let's now just up there and let's add the flag to graph.
Okay. So graph here. So I'll open this and let's see what's happening. Oh, wow.
So these are, if we zoom in here, these are actually all of the, if you're going to run if you're going to run turbo test and turbo lint, that is the summation of those two graphs. And it's each package JSON. It's a name hashtag task in each graph node. So these are the graph nodes of all of the possible tasks for turbo run test lint.
Wow. So it looks like we go from top to bottom, right? Because we've got the lint ones down the bottom and we're saying, here we go. So this is a good one. When we say stately UI test, what we're really saying is run the lint first and then run the test.
Yep.
So cool. So, and then when we run, for instance, stately web build, what we're saying is we need to build the config first if it exists, like if there's a build script there, then we build. Oh, so nice.
But we didn't ask to build, we asked to test. And the reason why that's going to build is because we said that Web Cypress, which has the web as a build, as a dependency, it needs to build its dependencies. So it's just going to be smart about that and only add the tasks that are the minimum set of tasks required to execute the desired end state.
Got you. So when we asked for this graph, we actually only asked for the bits of the graph that pertain to those tasks.
Right. And you actually, because we've made this relationship between linting and testing, if we can actually change in our CI, we actually just run this as just test because lint is going to happen in order to test because we made that relationship explicit.
So I can actually get rid of this and I can say, we now need to define a script in our root, which is, we've got a little bit of like test Cypress here stuff first. I'm going to just ignore that for now. So instead of yarn workspaces run test, we're going to run yarn turbo run test.
Yeah. And I think we can just get rid of the yarn turbo part. I think we can just call it turbo.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Perfect. So I'll just delete this little bit. We've got our turbo up here. We've got our build scripts running if we need them. And then we can push up. So added test to turbo.
Yeah. And if you wanted lint and test to run simultaneously, we would just remove that key and our test in our turbo.json depends on. If you do that, though, you do need to then specify both to tell Turbo that because there's no longer a relationship between linting and testing to run both. So again, you can control these relationships with your pipeline.
But what you're saying is whenever I need to run test, if I really want to lint first, I don't need to do like yarn lint and yarn test wherever. It just knows about it.
Yeah.
So cool. So if we head over to the GitHub Actions, we can start seeing that we got added turbo to lints here. So our baseline is kind of still pretty high, really. We're getting 30 seconds on install, which is kind of, what you're going to get on CI. And then this linting here, we're getting 16 seconds here. And this doesn't feel very like a big improvement, really. It was running sort of on like 8 seconds locally because I'm on an M1, and like this is kind of some sort of a Ubuntu thing. How can I enable my CI to get some of the sort of caching juice that's happening locally? Because here you can see it's doing cache miss, even though probably these hashes are the same ones that I've got locally.
Yeah. So at Vercel, we offer a Dropbox-like service, which we call remote caching for Turbo repos. And what this service does is it takes that cache folder that we looked at earlier, and it actually shares it with your entire Vercel team if you want it to, and potentially external CI/CD providers. So in order to enable this, what we can do is open up Terminal, and we can link our Turborepo to Vercel's remote cache, which is the default remote cache provider. So let's run yarn turbo login.
Here we go. Oh, it's just appeared.
Should be probably in the other screen.
Yep. It says you're all set. Give me my authentication.
So
nice.
Matt clicked a button off screen to just say authorize.
I did, yes.
But yeah, and then we'll do npx turbo, or we could just do yarn turbo link. It doesn't matter. Yarn turbo link. And now they'll be prompted if you want to enable remote caching. And then again, to summarize, remote caching shares your cache Turborepo task outputs with the rest of your Vercel team. You'll select the Vercel team
I'll go with Matt Pocock this time.
Great.
Okay.
And now let's actually delete our local cache here, just so we force upload. Turbo is very aggressive about caching, as you can imagine. So let's run.
We can run yarn turbo run test link, right?
Turbo run test. Just test. Yeah.
Yeah. Test. Okay. So it's doing our linting. It's doing our testing. Oh, hard to get used to this. It's so nice. So Web Cypress test. I'm just going to quickly check that nothing changed here. Oh, yeah, we're fine.
Yeah, we're still running it through dev, so it'll be slower. So we'll do that in a minute. We'll do build.
Oh, yeah. And then how do I, because I'm running my stuff on GitHub Actions, which is not linked to Vercel. It's nothing to do with Vercel. So how do I get my GitHub Actions to know about this remote cache?
True. So what you do is we need to go into Vercel's dashboard, and we need to create a token. So a personal access token, which you can then scope to a team. Okay. So you create it and you give the token a name, and you'd select the scope to your Vercel team. In this case, whatever it is. We won't do it because we already did it, but
yeah,
we don't need to expose Matt's account.
This is a great British phrase, but here's one I made earlier. It's inside secrets actions, and I've added it under turbo token here.
Yeah,
you can do the same thing by copying what Vercel gives you and just sticking it under here with turbo token and the value in there.
Yep. And so then in your ci.yaml file, we need to set the some environment variables for turbo. And we could set that as an env. When we run turbo, you can do it like if you're going to run turbo more than once, although you don't need to. You can set this sort of the top, but I believe is it env or with env? I forget. I think it's env.
And for clarity, this is our test area here. This is where we're actually running the turbo. So we run env here, and this will give this particular step in our GitHub action access to these environment variables. We've got turbo token, which it's secrets.turbo token here. And then there's another one I need to add, right?
Yeah. So turbo team, which is the best environment variable name. I think what do we set this up for? That was your personal one, right? So it was to
exactly.
What is your personal Vercel URL? If you go to your settings, I think you can see your, if you go to your account settings.
So, there's a little cheeky way you can do it, which is if you go to any of your projects, it's this little slug up
Even
here.
Better. Yeah.
So I'll just stick that in there.
And then
I could put this as a secret as I want, but I'm not going to.
Yeah. And then if you want to get even smarter about this, you could add another one called turbo remote only. And what this will do is instead of turbo caching to local disk, to node modules or something like that, turbo will actually just avoid doing that. And why would you want that done? The reason is that turbo's cache is going to be additive and grow. And it will just make your hydration of your node modules cache take longer and longer and longer. But if you force it to be remote only, it basically will only look at the remote cache service as as potential there. So
this is a best practice, basically.
This is best practices. Yeah, exactly.
Cool. For your CI only, right?
Yeah, for your CI only. Exactly.
Cool. Okay. So I can just push this up.
Yep.
Added remote caching. And this isn't just for CI, right? Like I've heard you call this multiplayer mode before. Like, what does that mean in like a local context?
Yeah. What it means in a local context is that if you and I are working on the same repo and you run a build or any task through Turbo, and then I check out your branch and I go run a build or a test, it'll be instantaneous for me in addition. So it's faster with friends.
Faster with friends. That is beautiful. And that's crazy too, because like there are all of these expensive tests that you can run and like expensive setups that you just run locally. And if for instance, you're checking out a PR that one of your colleagues has done, everything that you run locally will have already been run by him and be cached. And so, or him or her and be cached. That's crazy, isn't it? Okay, cool. So what this means then is on our CI, we've run everything locally, right? And everything's been sent up to Vercel and sent up to the remote cache. That means that our action is going to be kind of interesting. Added remote caching. Oh, hello. Well, that's intriguing. So we're down from a 2-minute run, 2-minute 30 run, down to 2 seconds. And full turbo, baby. 2 seconds. And so this is taken from my local, sent up to the remote cache. And this is how you get such good build times. I mean, that's crazy.
This is the trick. So remote caching is that secret sauce whereby you can dramatically improve your CI/CD times by recycling work that you've already done before.
Oh, so good. Okay, so I've actually got these apps deployed on Vercel now. So I have a Turborepo Stately demo web and Turborepo Stately demo docs. Amy, you can put those links in and they're actually deployed up here. And here we've actually got another CI that's working here, right? There's a CI that goes in and builds my app and it runs the build command and it goes in and does sort of a few things and blah, 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 blah. And then it actually uploads everything. Let's see if we can get this kind of a bit quicker because 59 seconds is pretty good, but I feel like with Turbo, we can get a lot lower.
Yeah, exactly. So let's actually go into our settings of Vercel and we can do that there. But I guess we configured build, but let's just look at it again to make let's actually look at turbo.json and refresh ourselves on what build is doing. And let's make sure that build is working locally first too.
So let's actually sort of tailor this specific config to what our app is doing locally. Because our build command, it doesn't actually depend on any other builds. The way that we build, if we just have a look at this, build, we've got a build command here, which is just next build. And what next build does is it just builds the next app. And we're kind of cheating a little bit here, or not actually cheating, because this is kind of a pretty good practice, is we're using a trick called next transpile modules. And this module, what it does is it tells next, these modules here, this stately UI module, I want you to go in there and actually just transpile it instead of me having to build stately UI separately. This is really cool for modules that you don't intend to publish to NPM, that you can just sort of let sit there, because it means that in my UI package, I can just literally have my main as like index.tsx, which is the entry point of the package. And then next transpile modules will go in there and say index.tsx. Yeah, I know what that is. I can transpile that as though it were just next code, which is kind of cool. So we don't actually need to do any building before we build our apps initially, right?
No, I don't think so. But one of the things that will happen often is that I almost wonder if you just leave it in there because there's no harm, no foul. And also if somebody does have a build step, you can just get it in there. So optional in this one. And then in that case too, there probably isn't a dist directory either. So we probably remove that too. So
true. So you're saying that just having the carrot there and this kind of build is kind of a best practice if you're going to do that eventually. So it's not doing any harm.
So it does. So I guess a question in chat is, doesn't that reduce the effect of incremental builds? Not necessarily, because you're Next.js as a bundler, and it's going to need to bundle it anyway. And basically you're telling it that, you know what, also transpile this other folder. Next transpile modules is basically saying, I have another source folder in my Next.js app that lives outside of it. Now, the way it saves a lot of time is not actually in transpilation, but in type checking, because what you can do is type check that UI package independently and then incrementally, and then you do not need to retype check that code in your Next.js app if it was in source, for example. And that teams save days a week with this technique because type checking takes so long.
And it's also really, really intuitive in dev mode as well, because when you're in dev, if it's just transpiling all the modules, then you can just make a change to the module and it just hot module reload still works. Everything just checks out. Everything's just, it's so intuitive and easy. So it's pretty good for build. Like you could build it independently, get Turborepo to cache it and then do that, or you could just do this. And this is really good for internal modules, definitely. Yeah.
Again, this trick though doesn't work. If you are going to be publishing this to NPM, you should transpile to like, CommonJS, MJS, like ESM that's consumable. You should then have a build task. You should specify your dist folder as outputs.
And we can show that a bit later if we fancy it as well. There's some cool techniques. Okay, so we got our build. Let's see if it's working. So I should just be able to run yarn turbo run build. And if I just have a look at this again, then all we're saying is it depends on other build scripts, which actually it won't run, but it's just checking out web build and docs build. And so it's building the Next.js apps independently. And this is interesting because we've got this outputs thing here. And it's saying that inside web.next, this is actually the output that Next builds, right? It just sort of dumps it all here.
Yep.
And you're saying that with remote caching, what I'm going to get is, because on here, like on lint, for instance, like it's caching the logs itself. But what is it caching when it comes to these outputs?
It's going to look at the contents of the Next folder and it's going to put it into, if you pop open node modules, if we look at the node modules.cache, let's go figure out, and we can just go find the, maybe hard because we have so many. Let's go find the hash keys. 66. Oh, it's right there. 66E. A little bit higher. There you go. You'll see .next. There it is. Right
it's
there.
All just that.
Web.next. So now if we run this again and we go into, which one was that, web? So if we go into apps web and we delete the .next folder in apps web, just to show what's happening.
I'll just delete both and just see what happens.
Sure. And we leave them open up. We'll just leave them there. And we run this again. This will be instant, 55 milliseconds, and boom, our Next.js app. We already did this work. Why do we have to do it again? And so Turbo's going to put that .next folder into position.
So this is crazy. So like there are just so many use cases for this, right? Like it's just cache the result of the build and means that you don't need to rebuild. Like it just pops in. And again, this is amazing locally. Like this is great for when you're running like test coverage and your tests output some coverage, for example, or you have Cypress tests that produce videos or things like that. Like they just all get instantly put in whenever you run this, and it's full turbo. Disgusting. So, okay, I guess then we don't need to do anything else we can just push this up, right?
Yep.
We should say, by the way, we're like, I'm having a great time talking about this, Jared. Like, I think if we overrun, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think we should just keep going.
Let's keep going. Yeah, audience, what do you reckon? Like, we got loads of things to talk about, loads of questions to answer as well. And of course, this video will be available afterwards if you want to tune out or if you've got something to do. So, okay, let's push this up. Remove dist. But this is interesting. So now, if we talk about this script here, which is the one that's actually like pushing this out to web, I've got a theory, and this is my theory. Let me work out if I've got my mental model right. Because we did our work locally and we built it locally, now when we run the kind of build script in Vercel, it's going to actually pick it up and kind of like it's going to have done the work already. And I guess what we might need to do actually is if I go
I think we need to change up our settings a little bit of these apps. Maybe. Yeah. Let's see here.
I think we do. Yeah. So
settings.
Where are they?
Scroll to the top. Settings.
Yeah, settings.
All right. So let's so instead of yarn docs build, let's set we're in docs or apps docs. So let's cd to the root. So cd ... So Turbo needs to be run from the root. So we're going to delete
this is from the root. Yeah.
So we're going to cd but we're going to actually select the root directory. If we scroll down a little bit more.
Yeah, it is the root. Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually want to change that to apps. This is important. Apps. Doc. Oh, I guess we're on docs. Yep. And save that. If we run, if you hit the little save button on the right, I think it tells you to not put that there. Apps docs. Great. And then let's not override the output directory. Let's leave it as is. And then let's go cd to the root. So cd //. And then, and then do yarn turbo run build. And then we're going to add a filter because we don't want to build both apps. We only want to build one app. So we want to filter = docs. And after docs, if we had dependencies, we can actually get rid of those quotation marks. If we had dependencies that also needed to be built, the way you could specify them is you could add 3 trailing dots. And this will tell Turbo to make sure that all dependencies will also be built.
Got you. So another best practice.
Yes.
Cool.
Because we don't want to build both apps. So if we just run build, that'll build both apps. We only need one app built. So let's press save here. Wonderful. And now let's go to our application and we'll redeploy it. So let's go to our last build, or preview deploy here. And let's just redeploy. And let's include the build cache for this.
And the build cache is kind of like a next
That's
cache,
the node modules cache. Yeah, exactly.
Oh, cool. Okay. So redeploying. So what are we expecting to happen now?
Well, let's see. We actually changed turbo.json. So we actually haven't run a command locally with this particular hash yet.
That's true.
So if we, so now there'll be, so that's local, but if we ran it with force, it would push it. So we'll have to we'll do it twice. It's okay. And then we'll pull it down again.
So it's still running yarn install, right? So this isn't something that Turborepo supports yet, like caching these node modules and that kind of thing. Like you're always going to have your install step.
Yeah.
Cool. So I should be able to run yarn turbo build force. And
if it beats it.
Yeah. Bypassing the cache. It's pushing everything up. Cool. Okay, nice. That's all setting up.
Let's see. I don't know if we got it there. Oh, we got it. It was fast enough. So that was instant. So this deploy took how long total?
Only 32 seconds. Yeah. 32 seconds. And that's basically yarn install and then just wow.
Done.
So wait, so we didn't have to set anything up here. I didn't have to do anything turbo token, turbo team. It was just automatically set up for me.
Yep. And even cooler than that, if you you can see how it's all working. If you go into your usage settings, so we go to Matt at the top there, and we go to usage, and we scroll down to artifacts.
There it is.
And you can actually see how much time we've saved with Turbo by both local caching and remote, like local hits and also remote hits from Vercel's remote cache. You can also see the number of artifacts in your cache if you scroll down a little bit further, and the amount of bandwidth as well that you've been using.
We should probably have a look at the Stately version of these, because the Stately version is kind of nutty.
Yeah.
Like we adopted this in January, and we went pretty hard on it straight away. And bear in mind that we're a team of we were a team of 4 developers at the time. Let's go all the way back to kind of the time when we adopted it, which was, in fact, I can do last 12 months. And then if we go down to artifacts, we've saved 117 hours so far with Turborepo. And that number, as we scale and as we add packages, as we add code, as we add developers, that number is only going to grow.
Yep.
This is insane. Like 38 hours in January.
And you're all like a team of like 3 or 4 people, right?
Yeah. A team of 4 people, just hired 2 more people, 6 people. So this is crazy. So if this scales with the size of your team, I imagine, and I imagine like bigger teams than us will get enormous results out of this.
Yeah. So the next thing you can do is which I'll show you, experimental feature. See if it works. Okay. So we're going to go into Vercel. We're going to go to the ignored build step. This is new for all of you Turbo folks. I was saving this. Matt has never seen this before. If you go into we switch back to our demo account here.
Yeah.
And let's go back to, which one did we set up for Turbo? Was it docs or web? I forget which one.
It was docs.
We can figure it out. Docs. Let's go to settings here. And let's go to Git and scroll all the way down. Ignore build step. And I want you, this step basically tells Vercel, it's like a pre-build step. And depending on what you put here, if it's a 1 or a 0 returns, it will cancel the build. So that's useful if you're in a monorepo and you've got a lot of projects and you don't really want to deploy them all. You only want to deploy the ones that have actually changed. Now, the problem with this is it's easy when you have just like 2 or 3 apps that are just self-contained. But when you have shared dependencies, it gets more complicated. You have to kind of like list out the files in Git and deal with this thing. So what I want to share with you all today is a new experimental script that we have called turbo ignore. So he just put npx turbo-ignore. Actually, it's all just one word, turbo ignore. It's its own package. And we press save here.
Mm-hmm. Have I got it right with the dash?
You got it right. Exactly.
Cool.
And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our repo and make a change to web, the other project, and see what happens.
Okay.
So let's go to web and make a cosmetic change here. It could be anything.
Sounds good. Great web. Let's push it up. Great web. I'm so excited about this, by the way. I have no idea what's going on. And I've been through this hell before of actually trying to write a custom script for this. I'm really, really pumped.
All right. So let's go to our overview here, docs. And if you scroll to, it's not even there because it's been canceled already. So if you go to status, 4 of 5, sorry, scroll on down. If you go to this little icon there, status now show canceled. Boom, 5-second canceled. So Turbo is smart enough now to know when to cancel deploys for your monorepos on Vercel with 1 command, 2 words.
I'm going to add a linear issue to add this to our production right now because this is just crazy.
So I will say it is very specific about it's not really documented, it's experimental, but it's very specific that you're really using this like on Vercel and you're building 1 app at a time. And that also it kind of expects your build script to look like the one that we showed you, which is like filtering for 1 app and maybe its dependencies. If you're doing, or at least to that state, under the hood, what this is actually doing is it's actually using the filter syntax to assume that your app is in your root directory, if that makes sense. And then it figures it all out for you. Yeah, it's pretty cool. If you look at the source code, it's using Turbo's static analysis, which is under a flag called dry run. And then it interprets that output and does all this magic. It's pretty sweet.
Well, I tell you what, we've covered an enormous amount. Why don't we just do a little bit of a summary and then we can answer some questions. We've had a look at adding Turbo into an app. We've reduced certainly our CI time from like 2 minutes down to 23 seconds. We have reduced our build times from like 53 seconds minimum to essentially 5 seconds minimum with this turbo ignore thing as well. And like, oh man, that's crazy. And then I guess, is there anything else? I mean, and now all you need to do in order to kind of just run everything in your app is yarn turbo run lint test build. And that will just kind of like zoom through everything. And if there's anything that you've missed, it will go full turbo.
Yep.
So
the ones in white, by the way, are from CI.
Oh, so these ones, because the colors don't work on CI. So it's actually, this is pulling down from Git. So cool.
Yeah.
It's amazing. The machines are working for us.
Exactly.
So why don't we take a little break and ask some questions?
Sounds good.
Shall I cue them up to you?
Sure. We had a question to how do we set up the Cypress pipeline? I think we should do that as well. We'll do that extended if we go over a little bit.
Right, we are officially over right now.
But we're going to record this and send it all out.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't I do a bit of driving and take us through how we set up Cypress at Stately? Because we actually found a kind of a little cool way to set up Cypress where it actually optimizes for Cypress itself, and it also minimizes the amount of time that it takes. So we've got a test. We've actually got this package called Web Cypress, which is kind of cool, which what it does is it actually depends on the Stately web, and it runs tests against the web side of things and runs against the web package. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, in fact, let me just run this right now. So I'm going to say yarn wc, which is a little alias that I've got in package.json to go into this file. I'm going to say yarn wc. In fact, I'm just going to, because I've got a feeling I've got something running at localhost 3000. I'm going to say kill port 3000. And what's going to happen is I'm going to run test Cypress, which is going to run a script called start server and test, which is by Gleb Bamitov. And that's going to go into the web directory and run next dev, which is going to appear on localhost 3000. And then it's going to run Cypress run and run my test suite. So let's see what happens. Yarn wc test Cypress. And me and Jared had a call a while ago, right? And this was, is this like the recommended way to use Cypress now with Turbo?
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think you discovered this.
I discovered this. I'm so proud of myself. Yeah, you can see here that it's running this dev command here, and then it's checking to see if it responds on localhost 3000. And now it's starting to run the Cypress tests. So this is cool. But what I realized was actually if I open up a new browser tab over here and I go to localhost 3000, it's actually like what Cypress does, if you don't know, it's an end-to-end test framework where it visits each page and it runs a test against each page. So this one, it says should have a button named boop, which is like taking 5 seconds actually. Oh, look, and it's failing because I actually made that cosmetic change to the web thing. Thanks, Jared, you screwed me over. I've got web, whatever, I'll commit it in a minute. So yeah, you can see that it's actually running some tests against this and it's failing because it's not matching what it thought. And by the way, what's the kind of default behavior with failure in Turbo? Like it's running all these different things. Okay, don't cache, and you just quit out.
Initially, we did cache, but it's deceiving. It's not always obvious. Safest thing to do is to just bail.
Got you. So everything in the cache is successful runs.
Correct.
Okay, cool. So what we realized is you can actually do something really clever with this in Turborepo, which is if we add this to our pipeline. So I'm going to say in our root, it's turbo.json. We're going to add test Cypress here. And our solution was to actually build the application before we ran Cypress on it. So we can say depends on, which is an array, and it's actually going to be the same as this. Because we want to build, it's in a separate package. And our outputs are going to be nothing because Cypress doesn't actually, well, we could kind of, Cypress does do screenshots and things, so you could put that there. And I've said outputs instead of outputs. So now I can run. Well, and actually what happens here too is when we're now inside that test Cypress script, instead of next dev, I can actually run next start, which if you've ever used next before, what this does is it takes that .next directory and it runs it as though it's in production. And it puts it on localhost 3000 as well. What this means is I can run yarn wc, or in fact, no, I'm going to run, clear all this, yarn turbo run test Cypress. And you can see, this is a great example of kind of the coordination that Turbo gives you, is it's building the web. It did actually have to build it because we made a change to it. And now it's running the Cypress tests. And the Cypress tests, instead of taking 5 seconds for one test, are actually going to be a lot faster because the next dev or the next build branch is kind of a lot quicker to zoom up. So we're getting our tests here.
Let's see if, I think there's somebody in chat since you might have had a typo in your Turbo JSON. So let's just confirm that that's the case. Outputs. Nope, you're good. You're good.
I'm good. I was on outputs, but now outputs.
I see. There you go.
There we go. And of course, now what we get is if I run test Cypress again, it's on full turbo. So our Cypress tests are now hooked up to this whole setup. And I'm going to add this into our CI as well. Pretty cool, right? Run turbo, run test, lint, test Cypress. So we can zoom on to the next question if you like.
So the other question was if we want to fix, we can actually explore real quick package tasks. So there was a little bit of a hack in the Cypress test to install the app as a dependency.
Yeah.
And that's the pattern that probably makes y'all head scratch. Why? So we can actually, if you don't like, that will work. But if you don't like doing that, you can actually use Turbo to specify implicit task dependencies.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to be like pure, or if you feel visceral that like maybe we shouldn't install an app as a dependency, we can actually say we can make another task, I guess, because you may have other Cypress ones, and say test Cypress here. Hashtag. Well, let's say it's not at. Sorry, on the other side of it, we want to invert that. It's Stately, Stately Web Cypress. Hashtag test Cypress, and we'll say that depends on. Let's see, which one is it? It's going to be web at Stately Web. I think it's at Stately / web. Is it, or just Stately Web?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Stately Web build.
Oh yeah.
Or I guess you already specified that in the task, so we don't even need. So we actually don't even. We could do it this way.
But let me break down the syntax, right? So what this is saying is we have this case up here, which is test Cypress. So in general, when we discover a test Cypress command, do this. These are the settings for it. But here we're saying, okay, let's override that for this package only. This package only depends on the Stately Web build.
Yeah, that package task, the pair of itself, and it's which is interesting. And then now we can get rid of, and let's say output's false here, or empty, and then now, or sorry, our output's empty, and then now if we go into our web Cypress, we actually don't even need to. Oh yeah, we can just run. Yep, exactly that. Just next start.
Nice. Yeah, just next start.
This is cool. Really useful pattern for. This is a useful pattern for if you have like a Rails app or an API or something that's like implicit and you don't want to depend on it. Another question was, so it overwrites, you can't inherit the global definition of test Cypress. No, it doesn't. It doesn't inherit. You need to overwrite it. And also we need to be specific here because we don't want all test Cypresses, even though we only have one, to depend on Stately Web build. I mean, presumably we might, but like maybe you do want to do it that way. It depends on how many Cypress. It's oftentimes to get like peak performance, you actually want to split your, for each app, you want to have a separate Cypress test package.
Yep. Well, there's a really common pattern with Cypress as well, which is folks actually install it inside their directory. So you would have actually inside web, you would have a Cypress package here, which has like your integration tests. So it's like integrations, something.spec.ts. Is this something that Turborepo supports? Because ideally you want to be able to run Cypress without, like on its own, sort of without the changes.
Yeah. The thing here is you can do this. And then we have a new key in Turborepo 1.2 plus called inputs. And what this would let you do is if you go to test Cypress, you could actually specify glob inputs, which is be Cypress /star/star.ts, I guess, right? Or, yeah, anything in the Cypress folder .ts. I don't know if JS, whatever you're doing, something like that, right? And this will say, okay, our test Cypress commands only ever depend on changes to files in the Cypress folder. So that's one way you could do it. You might also need to specify like things like tsconfig and other, like when you do this, it's very restrictive. So you'll need to specify. So
it's really only this stuff here. Yeah.
Right. So now but if you change package.json and change your Cypress version or something like that, it's going to be ignored. Like it won't, that may be what you want. That may be not what you want. It's again, it's kind of a blunt instrument. But it can accomplish this use case.
And is there any way, because I guess if we try to build here and our Cypress tests had changed, it would, like, do we need to somehow ignore the Cypress directory if we're inside build?
So this is where it gets hairy, where now you have to ignore it. And it's like, do you even want to do that? You might just want to just put in its own package. So you could do something like that.
But the way we've got it set up now with a separate package for Cypress tests, that's the best practice.
I think it is. It's whatever you sort of want, but it's dealer's choice there. But they're equivalent. It's just a question of like whether you want to have that kind of config and stuff like that.
For reference in Stately, we do have it set up with the inputs and it works fine.
Yeah. So there you go.
Cool. Next question.
Next
Got any
question
that you want to answer?
Yeah. Would the web build in Cypress still trigger builds of web's dependencies? Did we set that up? We could set that up. Would web's build of that? Yes. So it depends on web build. So the question was basically, will running Cypress trigger a build and of build's dependencies? And the answer is yes, of the web's dependencies. And that's because our build task is set up to include dependencies of the package.
Exactly. If we run test Cypress graph, we can take a look at this, and you can see that we have test Cypress at the top, and then Stately web build, which also builds Stately config, builds Stately UI. You can see it all the way down.
Yep, exactly.
It's really nice.
Great. Cool. Well, now we've set up Cypress. We've set up remote caching. We've set up GitHub Actions. We've set up incremental Vercel deploys with npx turbo ignore, a new feature. And we've reduced our Vercel deployment times from 54 seconds to a minimum of 5 seconds, or 17 seconds if there is a full turbo build. And then we reduced our CI/CD time from what did we start with? Around, what was it?
It was like 2.5 minutes or something.
Yeah. And what was this run? We get to 51 seconds.
Yeah.
So,
and this is actually still testing some stuff as well. We could go lower.
So there you go. So basically I'd say we cut things roughly, what do we say, around 60% here in the course of an hour or so by adopting Turborepo. And I guess let's look at how many lines of code we changed here. Let's see. We added, 20, and then we probably removed 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've missed some chances for removing stuff as well. All of this sort of yarn workspaces run lint. It actually means that you need to have a lint package in each part as well. So we've got all of these dumb sort of echo no lint needed here. So you can remove all these as well. So this is wonderful.
Yep. Great. Awesome. Well, I want to be respectful of folks' time. And also I want to give a big, huge thank you to Matt for joining us. My name is Jared Palmer. I'm at Jared Palmer on Twitter. Matt, how can folks follow you?
Yeah, I'm at mpocock1. You should also follow at Stately AI as well, and find our website at stately.ai. We're doing some amazing stuff on state machines and using all of these cool tools that we have here at Vercel as well. And yeah, I look forward to it. Feel free to ask questions in the Discord as well, and Jared will pick them up, or I'll pick them up. Thank you so much for hanging out with us.
This was fun.
Yeah, this was great.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. And everybody at Turborepo on Twitter, turborepo.org to get started. And as always, at Vercel, we're all about building the web faster, and Turborepo is a huge part of that. So thank you. Have an awesome day.